Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Jimmy Bergen, coordinator of special events at St. John's here, and I'm a little confused because I had cataract surgery, so it's so strange. Now I can't read, but I can see everything far away that I've never seen in my whole life. So I'm getting it's a weird going back and forth. Anyway, I will try to get through this. Welcome to our 22nd annual free concert series. This is the last concert of the summer series, alas. But if you looked at your program, there are 3 special events coming up in the fall, so that's great. We're delighted to see those of you who are here in person and extend an equally warm welcome to those of you watching via live stream. If you are in the building, please take a moment to silence any devices you have. The parking lot is done over here. The President's house is not done. Peresky's not done. There may be some construction sounds, but we'll power through that. It hasn't been too bad. This program is supported by a grant from the Massachusetts Cultural Council, which is a state agency, as well as the the Cultural Council of Northern Berkshire, which is our local agency. Any donations you might care to make at the back will go directly to support this program. Our little technical upgrade here, I learned a new trick from Dan Weiser, which I'm very grateful for. It's really easy. I've got the equipment to do it, so I'm going to figure out a way to do that. You can actually see the keyboard. Pretty great, huh? So I know you'll appreciate that. And now please welcome Dan Weiser and Tim Schwartz.
Thanks very much. It's great to be here. Thank you to James and all the folks here who make this wonderful series possible, this beautiful church. A special thanks also to Stephen Dankner, a wonderful local composer who probably many of you know. He's the one who I played a concert of his music in Baltimore. He was there, and he mentioned this series and needed a last-minute replacement, and I happened to be up in Vermont for the last weekend playing some concerts with him, and so this worked out really well to come down here and do this program we are calling The Sound of America. Tim and I have been performing together since we were grad students at the Peabody Conservatory over 30 years ago, and we've done things that my wife and I have never done together. We have, when we met with this kind of mutual admiration for American music, especially some of the lost composers of the early part of the 20th century. And then in 1996, we were very fortunate to win the U.S. Artistic Ambassador Program competition. That was run by the State Department. Unfortunately, that has been demolished, that program. But through that, we were sent on a 2-month tour of the Middle East and Southeast Asia, playing in countries like Syria and Egypt and the West Bank and what else? Pakistan, Bangladesh, many countries that had revolutions right after we left, so we were very proud of that. We were able to sort of maintain our friendship through that, which was about 50 concerts in 40 days, and it was quite an experience. But Tim is now down at Rowan University in New Jersey, where he runs the string program. He's also a visiting professor in London, so it's great to be able to get him. I have just recently moved down to Savannah, Georgia, where it's way too hot right now, but I do spend a lot of time up in Vermont, where I also run a concert series. So this program we're calling The Sound of America, and I really sort of came about because there's been a lot of talk lately about what it is to be an American, who is an American, and I think through the music we can begin to see that there is no one American. There are so many strands, a kaleidoscope of different cultures that have made America possible, that have made American music possible. So we're going to take you through some of these and just to showcase what an incredible diversity our American sound is. And we're basically going in chronological order. We might make a change or two on your program, but I'll let you know if we do. But we wanted to start off with a piece by the great Aaron Copland, and then this is the hoedown from his ballet Rodeo. This is a piece that sort of what most people think of as America. It has that sort of pioneer spirit, the evoking of this vast American landscape out west. But it was written by a Jewish guy from Brooklyn who had never gone west. So he sort of imagined this the sound, and he got those open fifths that make that sound, and he started using square dance tunes in his music, and he really sort of made this great American music. So I mentioned he grew up in Brooklyn. His parents were immigrants from Lithuania, Jewish immigrants who had settled in Brooklyn. His father ran a store, H.M. Copland's, which was like the Macy's of Brooklyn. Aaron grew up above that, and then in the 1920s, he actually headed off to Paris, where he studied with Nadia Boulanger, one of the greatest pedagogos pedagogues of all time. And if you listen to music that Copland wrote in the 1920s, you would not recognize it as the Aaron Copland we think of. It's rather modern, some angular, little avant-garde, jazzy. But when he came back to the United States, the Depression was hitting. And he realized that if he wanted his music to be heard by anybody, he couldn't just keep writing this intellectual music that a lot of people didn't really understand. And so he started to write music that the masses could really grasp. And he said once, any composer who is frightened of losing his artistic integrity through contact with a mass audience is no longer aware of the meaning of the word art. And he really began to find all of these wonderful cowboy tunes and Appalachian tunes, and he would ultimately write Fanfare for the Common Man, which is the Olympic theme. But in 1938, he wrote his first cowboy ballet, and that was called Billy the Kid. And he thought that would be his last cowboy ballet. He had his sort of fill of that. But it turned out that Agnes DeMille, a wonderful choreographer from the Ballet Russe de Monte Carlo, that ballet was now in the United States because it was during World War II. She saw that ballet and went to Copland and said, could you do another cowboy ballet? I really want to choreograph this. And so he was hesitant at first, but then they decided to do Rodeo. It was a huge success. And actually at the premiere of Rodeo, there happened to be two people in the audience named Rogers and Hammerstein, who were working on Oklahoma at the time. And they saw the choreography and immediately hired Agnes DeMille to do the choreography for Oklahoma. So it makes a wonderful circle. Now, Copland also wrote beautiful books about music. There's one very thin little volume called What to Listen For in Music, which I really love to give to my classes when I'm teaching sort of music history. And in it, he has some wonderful quotes. He says, so long as the human spirit thrives on this planet, music in some living form will accompany and sustain it and give it expressive meaning. To stop the flow of music would be like stopping time itself, incredible and inconceivable. But he also sort of teased out the idea of whether he could tell you what the meaning of music is. He said, the problem can be stated quite simply by asking, is there a meaning to music? My answer would be yes. Can you state in so many words what that meaning is? My answer would be no. So didn't help out that much. But now he also got a lot of criticism for his music. They thought it was kind of too populist and didn't show off the intellectual style that should be in a great American composer. But he had no great love for critics. In fact, one of my favorite quotes of his, he said, if a music critic puts together two words about music, one of them will always be wrong. Now, this piece, Hoedown, it is based upon two different fiddling tunes. So the first is called Bonaparte's Retreat. That's the opening theme that we hear. And in the middle, there's a slightly different tune called Miss McLeod's Reel. But the ballet itself really is a wonderful mix of kind of classical ballet and the exuberance of kind of the Broadway musical put together. And also, some of you from I think in the 1990s or 2000s, there was a commercial for the beef industry that used this music in it. It's etched in my head, and so if at the end of the commercial you got beef, it's what's for dinner. So if you get hungry listening to this, you'll know why. Here's the Hoedown. Welcome, Tim Schwartz. Thank you. So that's sort of one side of our American music, the kind of the fiddling, the cowboy music. And now we're going to go back in time to one of the first great songwriters in the United States, and that was Stephen Foster, who's sometimes known as the father of American music. Wrote many of the great early songs of the 19th century. Born in 1826 outside of Pittsburgh. Again, over 200 songs, including "Oh Susanna," "Old Folks at Home," "My Old Kentucky Home," "Camptown Races," sort of the great standards of America. He started off in classical music, but he really sort of wanted to write songs, and the inspiration would be his marriage to a woman named Jane McDowell in 1850. And soon after that, he would pour out, I think, about 70 songs in the next 2 years for her, including the one that we're going to do, "Jeannie with the Light Brown Hair," which was written for one of their anniversaries, I think the second or third anniversary. Her nickname was Jeannie. At the time, one of the most popular types of shows, unfortunately, were the blackface minstrel shows that were in the country. And his music often got used in those shows. And many of the songs from those shows were pretty awful, with terrible lyrics, using stereotypes that really just were incredible. And some of the lyrics for Stephen Foster songs also have that in it. But he was really hoping to upgrade some of these kind of melodies. And he said once, "I'm hoping that it can build up taste among some of the refined people by making words suitable to their taste, instead of the trashy and really offensive words which belong to some songs of that order." After the Civil War, his music began to be sort of more used as parlor or salon music, and many of the songs had these kind of Southern themes. But like Copeland, Foster never went beyond the Mason-Dixon line. He just had this image of the South and the workers there. Now, sadly, he would move to New York the last few years of his life, and he died at the age of 37. There was some debate. Some say he fell on something. Others say he might have committed suicide. We don't really know, but his life was certainly cut short. We're going to do this "Jeannie with the Light Brown Hair" in an arrangement by the great Jascha Heifetz, one of the great, probably the greatest violinist of all time. Heifetz had started playing when he was 2 years old in Russia. At age 7, he had already premiered he had played the Mendelssohn Violin Concerto in public. At age 12, he went to Berlin and he played for Fritz Kreisler, who was probably the greatest violinist of that time. And supposedly, upon hearing him, Kreisler said to his fellow violinists, "Well, boys, we might as well crack our violins over our knees. They're not needed anymore." This was a real talent in Heifetz, and so it was nice. He also traveled the world doing concerts in some places that never had seen concerts before. He was a real humanitarian, and he did lots of arrangements, especially of Foster tunes. So here's the Heifetz arrangement of "Jeannie with the Light Brown Hair." now, while those minstrel shows were going on, the real stuff was happening on the plantations, and the really great music was the spirituals that were being sung there, which really would become the first great American music. These spirituals had been handed down orally from generation to generation, and were just sung usually as solo lines out in the fields and the plantations, but were also often used, especially once the Underground Railroad got going, as these functional songs that would tell the slaves when it was time to go. So songs like Wade in the Water or Steal Away. They had these extra meanings that it was time to go and take the run into the water and away up north. There's been some beautiful writings about what these spirituals mean. A new book by Jane Ripley, she said, "The spirituals are a unique window into the depth of the human spirit. They express a suffering of body, mind, and spirit, a protest against injustice, a longing for freedom, and a conviction of worth despite all afflictions." And many of the slaves talked about the spirituals after. One of the best is by Frederick Douglass in his book After He Was Freed. He said, "I have sometimes thought that the mere hearing of the spirituals would do more to impress some minds with the horrible character of slavery than the reading of whole volumes of philosophy on the subject could ever do. When I was a slave, I did not understand the deep meaning of those songs. I was within the circle, so that I neither saw nor heard as those without might see and hear. They told a tale of woe which was altogether beyond my feeble comprehension. They were tones loud, long, and deep. They breathed the prayer and complaint of souls boiling over with bitterest anguish. Every tone was a testimony against slavery and a prayer to God for deliverance from chains. The hearing of those wild notes always depressed my spirit and filled me with ineffable sadness. I have frequently found myself in tears while hearing them. The mere recurrence to those songs even now afflicts me, and while I am writing these lines, an expression of feeling has already found its way down my cheek. To those songs I trace my first glimmering conception of the dehumanizing character of slavery. I can never get rid of that conception. Those songs still follow me to deepen my hatred of slavery and quicken my sympathies for my brethren in bonds." Now, after slavery ends, some of the slaves really sort of wanted to move away from the spirituals. It was a vestige of a dark past, and they sort of wanted to try to move away from it. And there was a chance that some of this spiritual tradition would get lost. But fortunately, there were several writers who came from north who knew about the spirituals, who came down and began to write down some of these songs so that they could maintain them. There was this book written in 1867 called Slave Songs of the South, which had some of the first melodies written down. And then later on, there would be new volumes where harmonies would be added. But really, the group that made spirituals come back in full bloom were the Fisk Jubilee Singers. There's a group of people at Fisk University, a new university for African-American students that needed a lot of money. And so this group of students got together and sort of made choral arrangements of some of these beautiful spirituals. They traveled all across the country performing them for people who had never heard these kind of spirituals. And of course, they went across the sea, went an ocean to England, to France, playing for composers and others over there who had no idea that there was such an amazing American music that they had never heard. And many composers began to use the spirituals over there as the basis for larger pieces. So they really sort of made the spirituals come alive. Now, the piece that we're going to do is Deep River, one of the most beautiful of all the spirituals. This was first written in print in 1872 when there was a book called The Story of the Jubilee Singers. This was written down, but it was also used in many other books, most famously by Henry Burleigh, a wonderful black singer who actually, we'll talk about Dvorak later, had studied under Dvorak, and he wrote a whole book of these spirituals with beautiful harmonizations in them. And Paul Robeson, the great singer, made Deep River famous, singing that early on in the 20th century. One last quote before we get to Deep River. This is from the great W.E.B. Du Bois in his book, The Souls of Black Folk, from 1903, where he says the following: "Through all the sorrow of the spirituals, there breathes a hope, a faith in the ultimate justice of things. The minor cadences of despair change often to triumph and calm confidence. Sometimes it is faith in life, sometimes it is faith in death. Sometimes assurance of boundless justice in some fair world beyond. But whichever it is, the meaning is always clear, that sometime, somewhere, men will judge men by their souls and not by their skins. Is such a hope justified? Do the spirituals sing true?" Here's Deep River. Things up a little bit here and move to another really important music. And this was sort of the first of the great exports that really shook the world by storm, and that's the music of ragtime. Now, ragtime sort of derives out of what's called the cakewalk. The cakewalk was a dance that was done on the plantations. It was actually a dance that the slaves would do to kind of imitate their white masters, who would do all these kind of very highfalutin dances, and the slaves would sort of do it with the big steps and that. Not sure the slave owners actually understood they were being made fun of most of the time, but they liked to watch these dances, and they would often give a prize. And the prize that they would give to the best of the black dancers was a cake. And that's actually where we get the expression, to take the cake. And that would be the dance was called the cakewalk and had a bit of a little syncopation in it. And over time, that would sort of move into what we call ragtime, which has syncopation all over the place. We call it ragtime because it's ragging the rhythm. Instead of having beats on the first beat and the third beat, where we sort of expect it in a march, the beat is sort of pushed aside in many ways. And that kind of rhythm really affected people who heard it for the first time. In fact, we have a wonderful letter from a German visitor who came to St. Louis in 1903 and heard ragtime for the first time. And he wrote back to his wife the following. Suddenly, I discovered that my legs were in a condition of great excitement. They twitched as though charged with electricity and betrayed a considerable and rather dangerous desire to jerk me from my seat. The rhythm of the music, which had seemed so unnatural at first, was beginning to exert its influence over me. It wasn't that feeling of ease in the joints of the feet and the toes which might be caused by a Strauss waltz. No, it was much more energetic, material, independent, as though one had encountered a balking horse, which is absolutely impossible to master. So it's hard to understand how different this was from all the other music. Now, ragtime really starts in sort of humble origins. It starts in the brothels of the Mississippi, along the Mississippi, and they would just have these pianists on the ground floor playing while things were going on upstairs. And most of the early ragtime players didn't know how to write music. They would just, sort of like jazz, they would sort of follow a structure, come up with a rag one day, and then the next day come up with a completely different rag. And there wasn't a lot written down in the early days. But one of the first to really codify the ragtime and publish it was the great Scott Joplin, born in 1868 in Texarkana on the Texas-Arkansas border. Grew up in a very musical family, but he was also fortunate. His mother was a domestic servant in the White Homes, and she would often bring young Scott Joplin, when he was 5 years old, with her while she was cleaning. And if there was a piano in the house, he would often run over to it and start playing it. He had this natural ability to play piano, and word spread about this phenomenal young man, and there was a Jewish immigrant in town named Julius Weiss, who said, I'll teach this kid for free. And he gave free piano lessons, but he also taught him about theory, about composing, about different composers. So Joplin had a really wonderful musical education. And when he embarked out at the age of 13 to try to make it as a musician, he traveled along the Mississippi, ended up ultimately in Sedalia, Missouri, playing at the Maple Leaf Club. And that's where he writes his first great rag, the Maple Leaf Rag, which became a huge hit, and would go on to write hundreds of more of those rags. But Joplin never thought of himself as a ragtime composer. He thought he was a great American composer, and his real dream was to write a great American opera. And in fact, he wrote a great American opera called Tremonisha. But unfortunately, it was 700 pages long, and he could find no place that would put this opera on, which is understandable. He went up to Harlem, tried to get some investors there, but no, it didn't work. And so he actually died a year after that, a penniless in a pauper's grave, never having seen this opera produced. But before he died, he told a friend, 50 years from now, they're going to be playing my music. And he was absolutely correct. Ragtime actually sort of faded away quickly in the 1920s when jazz came in, and ragtime was largely forgotten for the next 30 or 40 years. In the 1960s, new research was done, and then many of you might remember the movie The Sting in 1973 that really brought ragtime back into vogue. Joplin's music was studied, and then in 1974, for the first time, the Atlanta Opera Company put on Tremonisha, and it won a Pulitzer Prize. So Joplin knew he had written great music. Now, the plot is pretty silly, but it's opera, and most plots of opera are pretty silly. But the music is really great. If you ever get a chance to hear it, it's really wonderful dance music. Now, as I said, this ragtime spread like crazy. First, it went into the Midwest. There were a number of wonderful women ragtime composers in Indiana, Milwaukee, that area. We were still finding some of these things. They got lost, but great writers. And, of course, into New York, where Irving Berlin heard it. He would write Alexander's Ragtime Band, his first great song, which is not ragtime, but it sort of shows the craze for ragtime. And then it, of course, spreads across the ocean to England, to France, to Spain, and even all the way to Russia. And there's a quote from Igor Stravinsky, the Russian composer at that time, who said, he was asked what he thought about American music, and he said, I don't know much about American music, except for ragtime, and I consider that unrivaled. It is veritable art, and I can never get enough of it to satisfy me. I am convinced of the absolute truth of utterance in that form of American art. And he would write several ragtime pieces, but he finishes his quote by saying, God forbid that you Americans should ever compose symphonies or fugues, which was not very nice. Now, as often happens when black music spreads into white America, there is a backlash. It happens with rock and roll, with rap music as well. And there were some journals that began to sort of get fearful about what it was doing to the country. There's an article in 1904 saying the following: how can we regard this invasion of vulgarity in music other than as a national calamity? This cheap, trashy stuff could not elevate even the most degraded minds, nor could it possibly urge anyone to greater effort in the acquisition of culture in any phase. There is no element of intellectuality in the enjoyment of ragtime. It savors too much of the primitive conception of music, whose basis was a rhythm that appealed to the physical rather than to the mental senses. There's clearly lots of racism in that comment. But over time, it really spread into the heart of the music world. And in 1918, Musical America, one of the most important journals, came out with this crazy statement: the counters of our music stores are now loaded with this virulent poison, which in the form of a malarious epidemic is finding its way into the homes and the brains of our youth to such an extent as to arouse one's suspicions of their sanity. This is an evil music that has crept into the hearts of our American people and must be wiped out like other bad and dangerous epidemics have been exterminated. A person once inoculated with the ragtime fever is like one addicted to strong drink. Ragtime is syncopation gone mad, and its victims, in my opinion, can only be treated successfully like a dog with rabies. So this is some pretty severe stuff. I think you're going to be okay listening to this, but I'm just going to give you a warning. We're going to play the Paragon Rag by Scott Joplin. Thank you. All right, we're going to go a little off book here. I wanted to play a work by Antonin Dvorak. And you might say, well, Dvorak's not an American composer. Well, he wasn't, but he did spend 3 very important years in the United States. And without Dvorak, it might have been a lot longer before the spirituals and other kinds of American music began to rise up, because he was the one sort of giving license to composers here to say, just listen to your own music. You don't need to write bad imitations of European music. You got great music here. Dvorak was born outside of Prague, the oldest of 14 children. He went on to play organ. He really struggled to get his pieces first heard, but with the help of Johannes Brahms, who actually judged some of his music and gave him his publisher, Dvorak finally started making it, and his real goal as a composer was to gather the music of the Czech countryside, all the different dances that he heard, and sort of bring that folk music into more classical Western music. And he did a fantastic job with many of his pieces, like the Dumky Trio. But in 1892, over here in the United States, there was a woman named Janine Thurber who had this great idea to start the first conservatory of music in the United States, called the National Conservatory of Music. She raised quite a lot of money and decided she needed a big splash for a director of that school. She knew about Dvorak, what he had done for Czech music, and so she offered the job to Dvorak, who took it. He wanted to help American music, but she also offered 25 times as much money as he was making at the Prague Conservatory, so that certainly helped his decision. But he would come to the United States in 1892, spend 3 years here. And he'd always, as I mentioned, loved folk music. He said once, "The music of the people is like a rare and lovely flower growing amidst encroaching weeds. Thousands pass it while others trample it underfoot, and thus the chances are that it will perish before it is seen by the one discriminating spirit who will prize it above all else. The fact that no one has yet arisen to make the most of it does not prove that nothing is there." So when he first gets to the United States and he becomes, one of the first things he hears in the conservatory, the National Conservatory took in African Americans and women students, actually, he heard Harry Burleigh, who was one of the students there, singing spirituals in the hallway as he was mopping up. He was a scholarship student and he had to mop the floors. And Dvorak came running out and he said, "Oh, I love that piece. Do you know more?" And Burleigh spent a whole day singing all these spirituals to Dvorak, and he was just blown away by the power of that music. And he began to realize that there was some amazing music already here. Didn't have to start from fresh. And he said once, "My duty as a teacher is not to interpret Beethoven, Wagner, or other masters of the past, but to give what encouragement I can to the young musicians of America. I hope that just as this nation has already surpassed so many others in marvelous inventions and feats of engineering and commerce, and has made an honorable place for itself in literature in just 1 century, so it now must assert itself in the art of music. To bring about that result, we must trust the very youthful enthusiasm and patriotism of this country." He also spent a summer in 1893 out in Spillville, Iowa, where there was a big Czech population. But while he was out there, he actually went to some of the Native American reservations, and he heard Native American music and was blown away by that as well, seeing how meditative and plaintive it was. And so ultimately, he would write a very important article, and in it, he said the following: "In the Negro and Native American melodies of America, I find all that is needed for a great and noble school of music. They are pathetic, tender, passionate, melancholy, solemn, religious, bold, whatever you want. It is music that suits itself to any mind or purpose. There is nothing in the whole range of composition that cannot be supplied with themes from this source." And he went on to say, "The Americans expect great things of me. If the small Czech nation can have great composers and musicians, why could not they too, when their country and people is so immense? But I am ready to show them the way to the promised land." So he had this really messianic fervor about getting this music played. And so while he was here, of course, he would write several pieces based upon Native American and African American melodies, the New World Symphony, the American String Quartet, several others, including this sonatina, which has sort of largely been forgotten, but is a really fun piece. He actually wrote it for 2 of his kids, so I think we're very talented performers. But he said, even though this is intended for young players, I think even grown-ups should be able to converse with it. So hopefully you enjoyed it. We're going to play the last movement of this sonatina that he wrote in 1895, just before he went back and left the country. So here's Dvorak sonatina. Thank you. So Dvorak really sort of opened up a wonderful world to a lot of the composers here, and this sort of love of folk music, of real Americana began to develop, and one of the first to really sort of focus on the music of the South was a guy named William Christopher Handy, W.C. Handy, sometimes known as the father of the blues. He didn't write the blues, but he was one of the first to codify them, written down, so that he sort of invented the 12-bar, 16-bar blues. He grew up in a very religious home. Both his father and grandfather were ministers, and in fact, his father believed that all musical instruments were tools of the devil. And so when he brought in his first guitar, apparently his father said to him, "What possessed you to bring a sinful thing like that into our Christian home? Take it back where it came from." So he lost his guitar, but he was able to take organ lessons because there was an organ at the church, and got pretty good at that, would ultimately again take up the guitar and other instruments. In 1902, he would begin his first travels around South. He sort of traveled all the way through Mississippi, the whole state, listening to all the different music, the folk music that he could hear, all sorts of types, and he apparently had an amazing ear. He could spend a whole day listening to different pieces and then go home and in his ear he would remember what it was and write down, transcribe all of these melodies. And so he built up a whole sort of slew of ideas that he could work with. And in 1909 he would move to Memphis, and that's where he would write his Memphis Blues, considered one of the first blues written down. And then the Beale Street Blues as well. And a piece that we're going to play is the St. Louis Blues from 1914. When this came out, it was kind of a new idea, and he wrote about it. He said, but at the first performance, he said, "The one step and other dances had been done to the tempo of Memphis blues. But when St. Louis blues was written, the tango was in vogue. So I tricked the dancers by arranging a tango introduction, and then I broke abruptly into a low-down blues. My eyes swept the floor anxiously, then suddenly I saw lightning strike. The dancers seemed electrified. Something within them came suddenly to life, an instinct that wanted so much to live, to fling its arms, to spread joy, took them by the heels." So we're going to play the St. Louis Blues. This is actually an arrangement by Tim's uncle, Joseph Callie Lavolsi. Tim comes from an amazing family of all violinists. If you're not a violinist, you are a black sheep in Tim's family. This uncle would have been, I think, 125 years old today. It's a very long range in age, but Joseph Callie played with Gershwin and others in the early part of the 20th century on Broadway, and he made a really wonderful arrangement of the St. Louis Blues. So that's what we're going to play with you today. All right, now one other composer who really loved the blues and tried to sort of bring that again into a more Western style music was a guy named William Grant Still, who unfortunately is not played often enough now, but was really kind of known as the dean of African American classical composers, wrote some amazing works, and is the first African American to do many things. He was the first to have a symphony performed by a major symphony orchestra. That's his Afro-American Symphony, which is a great piece you can hear on YouTube. That was performed in 1933 by the Rochester Philharmonic. He was also the first African American to conduct a major symphony orchestra. That was the Los Angeles Philharmonic in 1936, pretty early on, and then was the first to conduct in the Deep South as well. That took until 1955 when he directed the New Orleans Philharmonic. He was also the first to have an opera produced by a major company. That's the New York City Opera that put on in 1949 his Troubled Island with lyrics libretto by Langston Hughes. He had grown up in Mississippi, but had made his way to Oberlin, a school of music, at that time the only school that was taking in African Americans, did his work there, and after he graduates, he actually goes to Memphis and works with W.C. Handy on the blues, writing down some of the things that he was finding, really sort of playing with what the blues structure could be. He then has to go off and fight in World War I in 1918 for a year, and when he returns, he ends up going to New York, and this is right at the beginning of the Harlem Renaissance, and he gets to meet all the great artists and writers there, became very good friends with Langston Hughes, and he really develops this wonderful style, and his goal at that point is sort of to take the low-down blues, as it was called, and elevate it into a classical form, and he got to work with Paul Whiteman and Artie Shaw and many others while he was in New York. The piece that we're going to play, it's a great piece. The whole piece is called the Violin Suite, written in 1945. We only have time for the third movement, but it is all based, it's not very good pictures, but they're all based on different works of art by Harlem Renaissance artists that he knew. The first movement, for example, is by Richmond Barte called Tribal Dancer, and that movement is if that dancer comes alive. That was the first work by an African-American artist at the Whitney Museum. It's still there. I was just there. Wonderful piece. The second movement is a beautiful spiritual influenced work with a crayon drawing by Sergeant Claude Johnson, and the movement we're going to do is Augusta Savage, a woman did the sculpture of a street urchin called Gamin, and in this we hear a little bit of the blues, but mostly we get a bit of this boogie-woogie style that was beginning as well, and this is the third movement of William Grant Still's suite. All right, I know we're going to go a little bit over, but we did want to finish with a really wonderful piece, and I think you will recognize the melodies from it. It is a suite from the West Side Story by Leonard Bernstein, and it's actually a fantastic arrangement that was done by Tim's cousin, the son of Joseph Cali-Lavolsi, who did the St. Louis Blues, and unfortunately he just passed away recently, but we do this in his honor. West Side Story, of course, Leonard Bernstein, one of the greatest of all of our American conductors, composers, conductors, educators. His young people's concerts, I still watch them as sort of inspiration for how to really teach music in a wonderful way. As a young man, he conducted New York Phil on about 2 hours' notice. It was a wonderful concert, but also wrote just in a wide style of music. And West Side Story would sort of become the greatest of his musicals. Although, interestingly enough, the original title for West Side Story was East Side Story, and it was going to be a sort of a retelling of Romeo and Juliet with a Catholic boy and a Jewish girl, but they decided that had been done before, and they didn't want to go that route, so they waited a little while. This is he and Arthur Lawrence, who wrote the book about it that it was based on, and in the 1950s, there was an influx of Puerto Ricans into the west side of New York, and that sort of set up a wonderful Puerto Rican against Italian, where he could sort of use the Latin American influence, especially in the song I Want to Come to America, and that really sort of fuses the score together. There are many people who thought that this could not be, it was a very difficult musical to put on. You needed a lot of young, unknown talent to do it. He actually wrote, "Everyone told us that West Side Story would be an impossible project. They said the score was too rangy for pop music. Besides, who wants to see a show in which the first act curtain comes down on 2 dead bodies lying on the stage?" Then we had the really tough problem of casting the show, because the characters had to be able not only to sing, but to dance and act and be taken for teenagers. Ultimately, some of the cast were teenagers. Some were 21, some were 30, but they sure looked like they were 16. Some were wonderful singers, but couldn't dance very well, or vice versa. And if they could do both, they couldn't act a lick. But somehow they came up with a pretty good show through all that. And it's really sort of one of our great, great musicals. Again, Bernstein was also a very wonderful humanitarian, really saw music as a way to sort of fight authoritarianism in so many ways. He said, when the Berlin Wall came down, he said, "This will be our reply to violence, to make music more intensely, more devotedly, more beautifully than ever before. Only music can name the unnameable and communicate the unknowable." So as I mentioned, this was written for Tim by his cousin just before we embarked on that wonderful journey to the Middle East. And we played West Side Story, and they were singing Maria in Pakistan, which I had no idea they knew it, but it was a wonderful thing to be able to play this music. And a lot of people knew what it was. And as I mentioned, this is an arrangement. Here's the dedication that Lawrence wrote. "This arrangement of West Side Story is written for and dedicated to Timothy Schwartz. His talent, along with his sensitivity and dedication to his instrument, knows no boundaries. I wish every good fortune in the pursuit of his musical career." It's been a pleasure to be here. We hope you enjoy West Side Story. Thank you all very much. Really appreciate it. There's an email list in the back for Amici Music. We're going to hope to come back here more times. If you want to get on our email list, please do sign up at the door. I'm happy to talk to you at the door. So thank you all for your kindness. We'll see you next time.
Thank you, guys. Tim, I got to ask you, which violin are you playing today?
This is the Italian Testore made in 1746.
I knew it. Woo! Thank you, guys. We're very honored to have you here, and we do hope we can get you back next year. This is our last concert of the summer, as I said, but on Sunday, September 21st, Alan Shawn, who's a local composer of great, well-known, lives in Bennington, and his wife and a violist will be playing a program of Fanny Mendelssohn that he arranged, Robert Schumann and Alan Shawn. That's a special concert on Sunday in the afternoon. Then on November 2nd, we're going to dedicate our new organ. It's been in since April. There'll be an official dedication concert that'll involve performances, instrumental, singing, choir, the works. The organ maker will be here, Jonathan Orloff. And finally, on November 23rd, Sunday, the Sunday before Thanksgiving, is our annual Messiah Sing, chorus, orchestra, and soloists. Audience is the chorus, and you're welcome to come listen. So if you'd like to get our emails about those three events, you can sign up on our list at the back, as well as the Amici Music list. And thank you, and I have a question, yes.
It's not a question, it's taking the opportunity to say what a marvelous concert that was. Enjoyable, enlightening. You guys did a fantastic job of schooling that thread of American influence.
Agreed, I feel hopeful even, kind of right now.
I know I speak on behalf of so many people to thank you, Jimmy, and everybody at the church that had anything to do with the 22 years of these fantastic concerts. What a gift.
Thank you very much, you're very kind. Thank you indeed.